Hello again, book lovers. The Friar of Carcassonne by Stephen O'Shea, in which I revisit the terrible episodes that took place in the south of what is now France at the very start of the 14th century. This was the period when the church was deciding that heretical views were intolerable, and as well as the Muslims, against which it was very fitting to crusade, there were some suspect branches of the Christian religion that also needed to be put down. A point that is made more than once in this book is that it was a little bit of potluck how the church received you if you decided to become a mendicant friar or a hermit or somebody who lived very, very simply. St. Francis of Assisi ended up having an order named after him, but many another one would end up being tortured to death or burned for the same or similar reasons. Well, here we have one, a certain Bernard Delicieux, a new hero, it is suggested, early on in the book, and it's an interesting thought. Why don't we know more about this chap who would, if anybody, put up more of a resistance to what became the famous Inquisition of later years than any other individual? On the very last page of this book we read, "Had he been burned, he might have entered legend." And there you have it, that's a possibility. In the end he was sort of forgotten to death. But he certainly had balls of brass, as we say in more modern times, as he stood up for the Franciscans against the Dominicans, for the local people against external powers. And there are so many currents running through this period of history, as we're in Languedoc, which is sort of in France, sort of north of Roussillon, which is, where's that? We've got Perpignan down there as well. These were all kind of disputed lands. Shifting over a little bit, you've got Aquitaine and Navarra. So the map of Europe is very distinct, and alongside the Franciscan versus Dominican narrative, you have the Pope versus various kings, which was also going on, a massive power struggle at that time, and the element, due to the geography, of north versus south. People who come from Paris to judge trials in Albi and Foix were not necessarily considered to be homers, let's put it that way. They came from a long way away, some land far away in the north. In any case, this is a very good book. Almost everything we know about Bernard Delicieux is from the trial testimony, which we get right at the end. So the first parts of the book are basically leading up to that and piecing together his previous life. And we begin with that previous life as it fits into the tapestry I've described. That's the first 4 chapters in part 1. And then at the end you get 1299, 1300 and 1301, 1302, 1303, 1304 with a separate chapter for each, as we have much more detailed evidence as to what was going on. And finally a third part which shows us what the state of play was at the end during the trial. There are so many fantastic set pieces in here, especially where they initially drive the hated Inquisition from Carcassonne and Toulouse and various other places, that I thought, well, this would make a fantastic film. I wonder if anybody's done it. Well, one of the baddies in this episode is Bernard Guy, who does crop up in a famous film about medieval monks and the like, which is namely The Name of the Rose. But without even entering into fiction, I just think that a good cinematographic telling of this story would be a fantastic film. Or maybe it would be too much for people to take, because, let's be honest, there's a lot of torture in here, on which I was pleased to note that our author doesn't buy the excuse that it wasn't the church that did all the bad stuff. They merely handed you over to what they like to call the secular arm, who were the real baddies. Well, that's a very limp excuse. As we see here, the church is quite capable of throwing up some vicious villains. And as happened in the Darkening Age, I like to corroborate a lot of stuff by looking on the internet and find very different tones are given to certain characters. And some things which are stated as fact are noted as conjecture in one or the other source. Well, I've sort of hinted at what happened to our Friar of Carcassonne at the very end, and it is a Name of the Rose-like tale of inquiry, trial, injustice, lies, heresy, all set in this witch's cauldron of the frothing up ideas of the time. By the way, the bulk of this book is set after the initial investigations into the Cathars. They sort of died down a bit, and then here they come in this part of our history, bubbling up. And as usual, although I've read a lot around this topic, I picked up quite a few nice little trinkets of information. We have one Rabbi Rashi describing coitus interruptus as threshing within, winnowing without. We have nice fleshing out of Philip IV, the French king at the time, Philippe le Bel, who was caught in a lot of crossfire. For a footnote junkie like me, after the 200 pages of text, we get about 50 pages of quite full notes. So these are the rabbit holes I like to find my way down via the footnotes very often. One of the things I discovered is that this book relies heavily on Friedlander's very detailed documentation of the affair, titled Bernard Delicieux, Le Marteau des Inquisiteurs, which I thought might be a good title for me to follow up this with, get some more details. And who knows, I might well do that if I ever have a spare €140 to spend. For those of you like me, interested in this theme, without so much cash to splash around, Stephen O'Shea's The Friar of Carcassonne is a very good introduction. It's obviously focused from the point of view of the subject of this biography, but it'll give you enough of the surrounding circumstances to maybe do what it did to me and like to read even more about these terrible happenings.